Hello everyone, I hope you're all well. So with this video, it was filmed over a period of 3 days with different, parts to it. And so I decided I would do a voiceover, add some music and a reading or two. And so I hope you enjoy this part of the video because it is a little bit different. I've done something similar in the past, but I just thought I would do this time because I wasn't happy with the audio yesterday when I was filming parts of it. So I'm going to be making some really pretty pockets made stitched with fabric and paper, and then I'll make some tags to go inside. So I recommend watching to the end if you can get through it. It's a long one, but it will be worth it, I think. The end result's really pretty. And although I wouldn't class this as slow stitch as such, because in actual fact I sped up that part of the video, those parts of the videos I'm stitching the pockets on. It's, I wouldn't class it as slow stitch for that reason. But I think the reason I sped those parts up was it was taking too long. I'm quite a slow stitcher in any case, and then I noticed that, it's just going to take far too long to get the whole thing in. So I sped those areas up, and I'm pretty glad that I did. I hope that, you can watch the whole thing, or you can just go back and forth to watch the areas that you find most interesting, or whatever you want to do, and I hope you enjoy the video. I'm pleased with the outcomes, and I will be adding them to journals and adding them to my stash. So anyway, and I might make some more because they were really quite nice to make, and I used fabrics from the big haul that I had with those vintage and antique fabrics recently that I showed you some of, and the ones that I used were pretty damaged, so it was nice just to use them, to see them being used. So there we go. So anyway, I hope you enjoy, and I'll be back shortly to chat some more. This is the reading of Lark Rise by Flora Thompson. I'm starting at chapter 1, which is called Poor People's Houses. The hamlet stood on a gentle rise in the flat, wheat-growing northeast corner of Oxfordshire. We will call it Lark Rise because of the great number of skylarks which made the surrounding fields their springboard and nested on the bare earth between the rows of green corn. All around, from every quarter, the stiff, clayey soil of the arable fields crept up, bare, brown and windswept for 8 months out of the 12. Spring brought a flush of green wheat, and there were violets under the hedges and pussy willows out beside the brook at the bottom of the 100 acres. But only for a few weeks in late summer had the landscape real beauty. Then the ripened cornfields rippled up to the doorsteps of the cottages, and the hamlet became an island in a sea of dark gold. To a child it seemed that it must have always been so, but the ploughing and sowing and reaping were recent innovations. Old men could remember when the rise, covered with juniper bushes, stood in the midst of a furzy heath, common land which had come under the plough after the passing of the Enclosure Acts. Some of the ancients still occupied cottages on land which had been ceded to their fathers as squatters' rights, and probably all of the small plots upon which the houses stood had originally been so ceded. In the 1880s, the hamlet consisted of about 30 cottages and an inn, not built in rows but dotted down anywhere within a more or less circular group. A deeply rutted cart track surrounded the whole, and separate houses or groups of houses were connected by a network of pathways. Going from one part of the hamlet to another was called going around the rise, and the plural of house was not houses, but housen. The only shop was a small general one kept in the back kitchen of the inn. The church and school were in the mother village, 1.5 miles away. A road flattened the circle at one point. It had been cut when the heath was enclosed for convenience in field work and to connect the main Oxford road with the mother village and a series of other villages beyond. From the hamlet it led on the one hand to the church and school, and on the other to the main road, or the turnpike as it was still called, and so to the market town where the Saturday shopping was done. It brought little traffic past the hamlet. An occasional farm wagon piled with sacks or square-cut bundles of hay, a farmer on horseback or in his gig, and Baker's little old white tiled van, a string of blanketed hunters with grooms exercising in the early morning, and a carriage with gentry out paying calls in the afternoon, were about the sum of it. No motors, no buses, and only one of the old penny farthing, high bicycles at rare intervals. People still rushed to their cottage doors to see one of the latter come past. A few of the houses had thatched roofs, whitewashed outer walls and diamond-paned windows, but the majority were just stone or brick boxes with blue slated roofs. The older houses were relics of pre-enclosure day and were still occupied by descendants of the original squatters, themselves at the time elderly people. One old couple owned a donkey and cart, which they used to carry their vegetables, eggs and honey to the market town, and sometimes hired out at 6p a day to their neighbours. One house was occupied by a retired farm bailiff, who was reported to have well feathered his own nest during his years of stewardship. Another aged man owned and worked upon an acre of land. These, the innkeeper and one other man, a stonemason who walked the 3 miles to and from his work in the town every day, were the only ones not employed as agricultural labourers. Some of the cottages had 2 bedrooms, others only 1, in which case it had to be divided by a screen or curtain to accommodate parents and children. Often the big boys of a family slept downstairs or were put out to sleep in the second bedroom of an elderly couple whose own children were out in the world. Except at holiday times, there were no big girls to provide for, as they were all out in service. Still, it was often a tight fit, for children swarmed, 8, 10, or even more in some families, and although they were seldom all at home together, the eldest often being married before the youngest was born, beds and shakedowns were often so closely packed that the inmates had to climb over one bed to get to another. So as you will see, I've finished sewing one of the little pockets, and I'm on the second one now, using a different linen. So yeah, the first one worked out quite well. I enjoyed sewing that one with a different coloured thread, and this one pretty much the same, really, just going around the edge with a different coloured thread. And yeah, it's really nice. I really enjoy sewing on paper and fabric together. It's so satisfying. Really love it. So yeah, that's why I chose this project today. Yeah, so I hope you've enjoyed it so far. Lark Rise is a really interesting book. It's a sort of a commentary on life back in those days, and Flora Thompson, who wrote the book, it was adapted for TV in a series called Lark Rise to Candleford. Some of you will have heard of it. It's certainly popular in the UK, where it was originally filmed, and then I think it probably was released elsewhere in different countries as well. It was very, very popular. Very pastoral in terms of the beautiful countryside and all of that sort of thing, and the lives maybe slightly romanticised, but still a really enjoyable story, and yeah, definitely worth a read if you get a chance to get a copy. Actually, there are lots of copies out there. I have 2 copies myself. Yeah, so I enjoy reading them, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed that little bit, and I will carry on reading, and I will also introduce more music, which I hope you're enjoying too. I'm just trying to do something a little bit different, just to rather than having me constant music going throughout the video, or me droning on. So yeah, hope you're enjoying it so far, and I will continue. So I'm going to play a little bit more music for you now, and then I will do another reading. In nearly all the cottages there was but one room downstairs, and many of these were poor and bare, with only a table and a few chairs and stools for furniture, and a superannuated potato sack thrown down by way of hearthrug. Other rooms were bright and cosy, with dresses of crockery, cushioned chairs, pictures on the wall, and brightly coloured handmade rag rugs on the floor. In these there would be pots of geraniums, fuchsias, and old-fashioned sweet-smelling musk on the windowsills. In the older cottages there were grandfather clocks, gate-legged tables and rows of pewter, relics of a time when life was easier for country folk. The interiors varied according to the number of mouths to be fed and the thrift and skill of the housewife, or the lack of those qualities. But the income in all was precisely the same, for 10 shillings a week was the standard wage of the farm labourer at that time in that district. Looking at the hamlet from a distance, one house would have been seen, a little apart and turning its back on its neighbours, as though about to run away into the fields. It was a small grey stone cottage with a thatched roof and green-painted door, and a plum tree trained up the wall to the eaves. This was called the End House and was the home of the stonemason and his family. At the beginning of the decade there were 2 children, Laura aged 3 and Edmund, a year and a half younger. In some respects these children, while small, were more fortunate than their neighbours. Their father earned a little more money than the labourers, and their mother had been a children's nurse, and they were well looked after. They were taught good manners and taken for walks, milk was bought for them, and they were bathed regularly on Saturday nights. And, after gentle Jesus was said, they were tucked up in bed with a peppermint or clove ball to suck. They had tidier clothes too, for their mother had taste and skill with her needle, and better-off relations sent them parcels of outgrown clothes. The other children used to tease the little girl about the lace on her drawers, and led her such a life that she had once taken them off and hid them in a haystack. Their mother at that time used to say that she dreaded the day when they would have to go to school. Children got so wild and rude and tore their clothes to shreds going the 1.5 miles backwards and forwards. But when the time came for them to go, she was glad, for after a break of 5 years, more babies had begun to arrive, and by the end of the 80s, there were 6 children at the End House. As they grew, the 2 old children would ask questions of anybody and everybody, willing or unwilling to answer them. Who planted the buttercups? Why did God let the wheat get blighted? Who lived in this house before we did? And what were their children's names? What's the sea like? Is it bigger than Cottesloe Pond? Why can't we go to heaven in the donkey cart? Is it further than Banbury? And so on, taking their bearings in that small corner of the world that they had somehow got into. This asking of questions teased their mother and made them unpopular with the neighbours. Little children should be seen and not heard, they were told at home. Out of doors it would more often be, ask no questions and you'll be told no lies. One old woman once handed the little girl a leaf from a pot plant on her windowsill. What's it called, was the inevitable question. 'Tis called Mind Your Own Business, was the reply, and I think I'd better give a slip of it to your mother to plant in a pot for you. But no such reproofs could cure them of the habit, although they soon learned who and who not to question. In this way they learned the little that was known of the past of the hamlet and of the places beyond. They had no need to ask the names of the birds, flowers and trees they saw every day, for they had already learned these unconsciously, and neither could remember a time when they did not know an oak from an ash, wheat from barley, or a jenny wren from a blue tit. Of what was going on around them not much was hidden, for the gossips talked freely before children, evidently considering them not meant to hear as well as not meant to be heard. And as every house was open to them, their own home was open to most people. There was not much that escaped their sharp ears. The first cottage on the labourers' 10 shillings was house rent. Most of the cottages belonged to a small tradesman in the market town, and the weekly rents ranged from 1 shilling to half a crown. Some labourers in the other villages worked on farms or estates where they had their cottages rent-free, but the hamlet people did not envy them. 1 shilling or even 2 shillings a week, they felt, was not much to pay for the freedom to live and vote as they liked, and to go to church or chapel, or neither as they preferred. Every house had a good vegetable garden, and there were allotments for all, but only 3 of the 30 cottages had their own water supply. The less fortunate tenants obtained their water from a well on a vacant plot on the outskirts of the hamlet, from which the cottage had disappeared. There was no public well or pump, they just had to get their water where and how they could. The landlords did not undertake to supply water. Against the wall of every well-kept cottage stood a tarred or green-painted water butt to catch and store the rainwater from the roof. This saved many journeys to the well with buckets, as it could be used for cleaning and washing clothes and for watering small, precious things in the garden. It was also valued for toilet purposes, and women would hoard the last drops for themselves and their children to wash in. Rainwater was supposed to be good for the complexion, and though they had no money to spend upon beautifying themselves, they were not too far gone into poverty to neglect such means. For drinking water and for cleaning water too, when the water butts failed, the women went to the well in all weathers, drawing up the buckets with the windlass and carting them home suspended from their shoulders by a yoke. Those were weary journeys round the rise for water, and many were the rests, and endless was the gossip as they stood at corners in their big white aprons and crossover shawls. A few of the younger, more recently married women who had been good in service and had not yet given up the attempt to hold themselves a little aloof would get their husbands to fill the big red store crock with water at night. But this was said by others to be a sin and a shame. For after a hard day's work, a man wanted to rest and not to do women's work. Later on in the decade, it had become fashion for the men to fetch water at night, and then, of course, it was quite right that they should do so, and a woman who dragged her guts out fetching more than an occasional load from the well was looked upon a traitor to her sex. So, I'm finishing off the stitching of the last pocket, and as you can see, I've used 4 different types of fabric, including lace and these linens, these vintage linens. I'm really happy with the way they've turned out, and yeah, desk is a bit messy, but that's just me. I hope you're enjoying it so far. Yeah, I really, as I said before, I really love working on paper and, fabric at the same time. It's just, yeah. And I love the look of these as well with the brown packaging paper. They just look gorgeous. So, yes, after this, I'm going to be making some tags, to put inside. And, yeah, I hope you'll stay with me while I do so and see the finished results. And there we go. I've got the 4 set out there to see. I think they're really pretty. So happy with them. And they will go in journals. They might go in little Happy Mail, Happy Mail packages. They could be standalone little pockets. You could maybe put them on a wall and add little things to them. I mean, they could look really sweet in any sort of, situation, I guess. And there we go. I'm just showing you with a little card inside, and so that's going to be one of the ones that I use, and then I'll make some more. So I'll leave it here. I will add a little bit more music, and then I'll do another reading. And I hope you're enjoying it. Hope it's giving you some inspiration and ideas for your own little fabric pockets. Using up that sort of old, raggy old vintage linens, or even some, pretty linens that you have stored away that you haven't quite known what to do with. Anyway, I'll leave it here and play some music for you. Enjoy the rest of this section, and I'll be back soon. Chapter 2. A Hamlet Childhood. Oxford was only 19 miles distant. The children at the end house knew that, for while they were small, they were often taken by their mother for a walk along the turnpike and would never pass the milestone until the inscription had been read to them. Oxford, 19 miles. They often wondered what Oxford was like and asked questions about it. One answer was that it was a big town where a man might earn as much as 5 and 20 shillings a week. But as he would have to pay pretty near half of it in house rent and have nowhere to keep a pig or to grow many vegetables, he'd be a fool to go there. One girl who had actually been there on a visit said you could buy a long stick of pink and white rock for a penny, and that one of her aunt's young gentleman lodgers had given her a whole shilling for cleaning his shoes. Their mother said it was called a city because a bishop lived there, and there was a big fair that was held once a year, and that was all she seemed to know about it. They did not ask their father, although he had lived there as a child, when his parents had kept a hotel in the city. His relations spoke about it as an hotel, but his wife once called it a pothouse, so probably it was an ordinary public house. They already had to be careful not to ask their father too many questions, and when their mother said, "Your father's cross again," they found it was better not to talk at all. So for some time Oxford remained to them a dim blur of bishops. They had seen a picture of one with big white sleeves sitting in a high-back chair, and swings and shows and coconut shies, for they knew what a fair was like, and the little girls sucking pink and white rock and polishing shoes. To imagine a place without pigsties and vegetable garden was more difficult. With no bacon or cabbage, what could people have to eat? But the Oxford Road with a milestone they had known as long as they could remember. Round the rise and up the narrow Hamlet Road they would go until they came to the turning, their mother pushing the baby carriage. Pram was a word of the future. With Edmund strapped in the high slippery seat, or later little May, who was born when Edmund was 5, and Laura holding on to the side or darting hither and thither to pick flowers. The baby carriage was made of black wickerwork, something like an old-fashioned bath chair in shape, running on 3 wheels and pushed from behind. It wobbled and creaked and rattled over the stones, for rubber tyres had not yet been invented, and its springs, if it had springs, were of the most primitive kind. Yet it was one of the most cherished of the family possessions, for there was only one other baby carriage in the hamlet. The up-to-date new bassinet, which the young wife at the inn had recently purchased. The other mothers carried their babies on one arm, tightly rolled shawls with only the face showing. As soon as the turning was past, the flat brown fields were left behind, and they were a different world with a different atmosphere and even different flowers. Up and down went the white main road between wide grass margins, thick buried hedgerows and overhanging trees. After the dark mire of the hamlet ways, even the milky white road surface pleased them, and they would splash up the thin pale mud like uncooked batter, or drag their feet through the smooth white dust until their mother got cross and slapped them. Although it was a main road, there was scarcely any traffic, for the market town lay on the opposite direction along it. The next village was 5 miles on, and with Oxford there was no road communication from that distant point, in those days of horse-drawn vehicles. Today, past that same spot, a first-class tar-sprayed road, thronged with motor traffic, runs between low, closely trimmed hedges. Last year, a girl of 18 was knocked down and killed by a passing car at that very turning. At that time, it was deserted for hours together. 3 miles away, trains roared over a viaduct, carrying those who would have lived a few years before or later, having used the turnpike. People were saying that far too much money was being spent on keeping such roads in repair, for their day was over. They were only needed now for people going from village to village. Sometimes the children and their mother would meet a tradesman's van, delivering goods from the market town at some country mansion, or the doctor's tall gig, or the smart turnout of a brewer's traveller. But often they walked their mile along the turnpike, and back without seeing anything on wheels. The white tails of rabbits bobbed in and out of the hedgerows. Stoats crossed the road in front of the children's feet, swift, silent, stealthy creatures which made them shudder. There were squirrels in the oak trees, and once they even saw a fox curled up asleep in the ditch beneath thick overhanging ivy. Bands of little blue butterflies flitted here and there or poised themselves with quivering wings on the long grass bents. Bees hummed in the white clover blooms, and over all a deep silence brooded. It seemed as though the road had been made ages before, then forgotten. The children were allowed to run freely on the grass verges as wide as a small meadow in places. "Keep to the Grinsard," their mother would call. "Don't go on the road, keep to the Grinsard." "Keep to the Grinsard," their mother would call. "Don't go on the road, keep to the Grinsard." And it was many years before Laura realised that the name for the grass verges in general use there was a worn survival of the old greensward. It was no hardship to her to be obliged to keep to the greensward, for flowers strange to the hamlet soil flourished there. Eyebright and harebell, sunset-coloured patches of lady's glove, and succory with vivid blue flowers and stems like black wire. In one little roadside dell, mushrooms might sometimes be found, small button mushrooms with beaded moisture on their cold milk-white skins. The dell was the farthest point of their walk. After searching the long grass for mushrooms in season and out of season, for they would not give up hope, they turned back and never reached the second milestone. Around the hamlet cottages played many little children, too young to go to school. Every morning they were bundled into a piece of old shawl crossed on the chest and tied in a hard knot at the back. A slice of food was thrust into their hands and they were told to go play, while their mothers got on with the housework. In winter, their little limbs purple mottled with cold, they would stamp around playing horses or engines. In summer, they would make mud pies in the dust, moistening them from their own most intimate water supply. They were like little foals turned out to grass and received about as much attention. They might, and often did, have running noses and chilblains on their hands, feet and ear tips. But they were hardly ever ill enough to have to stay indoors, and grew sturdy and strong, so the system must have suited them. Makes them hardy, their mothers would say, and hardy indeed they became, just as the men and women and the older boys and girls of the hamlet were hardy, in body and spirit. Sometimes Laura and Edmund would go out to play with the other children. Their father did not like this. He said they were little savages already, but their mother maintained that as they would have to go to school soon, it was better for them to fall in at once with the hamlet ways. Besides, she would say, why shouldn't they? There's nothing matter with the Lark Rise folks but poverty, and that's no crime. So the children went out to play and often had happy times, outlining houses of scraps of broken crockery and furnishing them with moss and stones, or lying on their stomachs in the dust to peer down into the deep cracks dry weather always produced in that stiff, clayey soil, or making snowmen, or sliding on puddles in water. Other times were not so pleasant, for a quarrel would arise, and kicks and blows would fly freely. How hard these little 2-year-old fists could hit out. To say that a child was as broad as it was long was considered a compliment by the hamlet mothers, and some of those toddlers in their knitted woolen wrappings were as near square as anything human can be. One little girl named Rosie Phillips fascinated Laura. She was plump and hard and had rosy cheeks with the deepest of dimples and hair like bronze wire. No matter how hard the other children bumped into her in the games, she stood 4 square, as firm as a little rock. She was a very hard hitter and had little pointed white teeth that bit. The 2 tamer children always came out worst in these conflicts. Then they would make a dash on their long stalky legs for their own garden gate, followed by stones and cries of long skanks and cowardly custards. Outside there was plenty to see and hear and learn, for the hamlet people were interesting, and almost every one of them interesting in some different way to the others. And to Laura, the old people were the most interesting of all, for they told her about the old times and could sing old songs and remember old customs, although they could never remember enough to satisfy her. She sometimes wished she could make the earth and stones speak and tell her all about the dead people who had trodden upon them. She was fond of collecting stones of all shapes and colours, and for years played with the idea that one day she would touch a secret spring and a stone would fly open and reveal a parchment that would tell her exactly what the world was like when it was written and placed there. There were no bought pleasures, and if there had been, there was no money to pay for them. But there were the sights and sounds and scents of the different seasons. Spring with its fields of young wheat blades bending in the wind as the cloud shadows swept over them. Summer with its ripening grain and its flowers and fruit and its thunderstorms, and how the thunder growled and rattled over that flat land, and what boiling, sizzling downpours it brought. With August came the harvest, and the fields settled down to the long winter rest, when the snow was often piled high and frozen so that the buried hedges could be walked over, and strange birds came for crumbs to the cottage doors, and hares in search of food left their spoor around the pigsties. The children at the end house had their own private amusements, such as guarding the clump of white violets they found blooming in a cleft of the brook bank, and called their holy secret, or pretending the scabious which bloomed in abundance there had fallen in a shower from the midsummer sky, which was exactly the same dim, dreamy blue. Another favourite game was to creep silently up behind birds which had perched on a rail or twig and touched their tails. Laura once succeeded in this, but she was alone at the time and nobody believed she had done it. A little later, remembering man's earthy origin, dust thou art and dust thou shalt return, they liked to fancy themselves bubbles of earth. When alone in the fields when no one would see them, they would hop and skip and jump, touching the ground as lightly as possible and crying, "We are bubbles of earth, bubbles of earth, bubbles of earth." I hope you enjoyed all of that. So I'm coming to the end now of the video and I'm just adding some final touches. So we've got some pretty fabric there that I've cut from an old shirt of mine, and just making a little ribbon to decorate. So yeah, it's just sort of the finishing touches really, and as I said, I really hope you enjoyed the video. I know it was different for any new subscribers. I've only ever done this, I think, once before, this sort of mix of music and readings and, just commentary. So, as I said, it's a little bit different and I do enjoy doing it. So I hope you do like it. If you don't tell me. You don't. I don't want to know really. So I'm just finishing off, and as I said, these lovely little pieces will go into journals, and the pockets will be attached to pages, or they'll be just freestanding sort of pieces that can be moved around in journals or whatever. You can use them whatever you want. They make nice little gifts if you write in a card or something like that and just add something personal. So yeah. And well, I want to say thank you again to everybody who comments, likes, and those of you who are recently subscribed to my channel. I really appreciate that you bothered to make the time to do that, and also to those of you who have supported me along the way. There are a few of you who regularly comment, and I really do appreciate it. It makes all the difference to my motivation and helps me to move forward with my channel. So some of you may have noticed that I have monetized my channel again. I decided to try it again just to see how well it does. My main motivation was that I think that YouTube weren't promoting my channel, and I felt that maybe the way to do that was to go back to monetization. So I've done that just to try it out, and I hope it doesn't affect the quality of my videos or your enjoyment. So once again, thank you very much for watching. Take care, everybody, and there should be another video coming up very soon. Bye for now.